Hi again, everyone. I'm going to try to talk really fast because I want to try to wrap everything up in one last video. I know we've been spending a lot of time on chapters 5 and 6, but hopefully we can get it in just one more video, so hang in there with me. But I just was telling you about this study where some participants received a drink. They were told it was vodka. It really wasn't vodka, but they responded in a particular way just because they thought there was some particular ingredient in their drink. So responding to a treatment that isn't even there, what is that called? So in statistics or in experimental design, we call that the placebo effect, where you have a particular effect to a treatment you believe you're getting, but you're really not getting the active ingredient in the treatment. You're getting what's called a dummy treatment. So as you're reading through chapters 5 and 6, you're learning about this idea of what a placebo is. So a placebo is a dummy treatment with no active ingredients. And individuals' response to this dummy treatment is what is referred to as the placebo effect. I want to make it clear here. Notice that we call this a treatment. So one common misconception I've noticed sometimes when we've given students problems related to experimental design is that they'll assume that those who are in the placebo group or maybe in a control group, they're not getting any kind of treatment. They are still getting a treatment, so they're being treated in a particular way. There's some sort of manipulation, but the treatment they're getting does not have that same active ingredient that those in the other group or the other groups will be getting. For example, you see this a lot in medical research. So researchers might be interested in the effects of a medication. Some individuals will be randomly assigned to receive the medication that has that active ingredient in it. Others will be assigned to a group where they're given a pill or they're given some type of substance to take. They're told that it's the medication, but it's really an inert substance. It might be a sugar pill. It might be some kind of saline solution that doesn't have that active ingredient that the actual medication has. And this is done in order to better understand if the response we're seeing, is it actually due to the active ingredient that's in the treatment? Or is it just due to what people think is supposed to happen because they know they're getting a treatment? So if you think you're getting a medication that's going to help you, perhaps your stress level might go down. Perhaps you're going to be feeling positive about what's going to happen. Your outlook is changing, and that could have an impact on any response that is observed. So this is a way for controlling whether or not an observed response is actually due to the active ingredient or due to other things going on because people think they're getting a treatment that's going to help them. So again, as I just mentioned, many people will respond favorably to any treatment, even a placebo. So having a placebo in a study can help us better assess whether it's actually the active ingredient. Again, apologies for my writing, in the treatment that is affecting the response and not, let's call this the power of positive thinking. So hopefully it's making sense to you just why you would want to include a placebo in a study, why you would want to control for just what people think is going to happen. Again, this is going to give you a more pure measure of whether the response is due to the active ingredient in the treatment or to other things that are not in that treatment. Again, things like the power of positive thinking. So here's another study that gets at the same idea of how a placebo can have a particular effect. So this is very similar to the vodka study that we just talked about. So popping a multivitamin can lead to debauchery. So debauchery is, you can think of that as bad behavior, engaging in behaviors that are not very good. So this particular research was conducted in Taiwan. The researchers gave placebo pills to 82 volunteers. So everyone got a placebo pill in this study. Half of the individuals were told that the pills contained vitamins. They were told that you're taking a multivitamin. This is the multivitamin we want you to take. The others were told, honestly, this is just a sugar pill. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to help you. It's just a sugar pill that we want you to take for a certain amount of time. So the individuals took the pills for a certain amount of time. And then at the end of the study, they were given certain surveys. And the researchers were looking at different responses and comparing the responses to those who thought they were taking a multivitamin versus those who thought they were just ingesting a sugar pill. And they found basically that those who thought they were taking a multivitamin reported a greater sense of invulnerability, less desire to exercise, more of a desire to eat unhealthy foods and to engage in other behaviors that might not be healthy for them. So it's almost like they were thinking, well, I'm taking a multivitamin. It's going to protect me against all these bad behaviors I'm engaging in. It's going to be healthy for me. I can engage in these behaviors and not worry too much about it. So here are some questions I want you to think about. So just based on the little bit that I've told you about this particular study. So true or false, the individuals are the placebo pills. What do you think about that? So I'm hoping that you're thinking this is a false statement. Remember, the individuals in the study are those who are getting the treatments. They're the subjects. So the individuals in this case would be the people that took the pills. The pills would actually be part of the study. What was the explanatory variable? So how would you describe maybe what this explanatory variable is? Maybe we could call it what people were told about the pills. So some were told these pills are multivitamins, some were told these pills are sugar pills. What was the response? So maybe we can call this behavior, survey responses. So obviously they looked at lots of responses to survey questionnaires about people's behaviors or their perceptions or their attitudes about different things. Would you feel comfortable generalizing these results to a larger population? Why or why not? So we want you to be thinking about what would you want to see in a study to be comfortable in taking the results from the sample and saying something about a larger population. What would you want the sample to be? I would say no, because the sample is not random. Remember, I told you the sample was composed of volunteers. So the sample was not randomly selected. It's possible those volunteers are representative of a bigger population. We're not really sure. What population that would be, I'm not really sure. Maybe we could extend the results to people in Taiwan, but would the results be similar for people in other countries? We don't really know. But if you want to be able to generalize from the sample to the population, remember your sample needs to be representative of the population. And you might remember back earlier in the semester, you learned that voluntary response samples can be biased. They might not necessarily be representative of the population. Ideally, we would want a simple random sample if possible. Okay, so some other quick things I just wanted to say about placebos. So the placebo effect is that people respond to any treatment. So they just respond to getting a treatment. They think they're getting something that's going to help them. So it doesn't necessarily matter what's in that treatment. It doesn't have to have the active ingredient. It could still have an impact. What if we want to reduce or eliminate the placebo effect? How do you think that you could do that? Well, you could tell people you're getting a placebo. Just tell them what you're getting has no active ingredients. It's just a sugar pill. It's a saline solution. It's not alcohol. It's tonic water. So that can be a way to reduce the placebo effect. But think about whether you'd want to reduce or eliminate the placebo effect. I'm hoping you're thinking that, no, we wouldn't want to, because again, what we want to do is we want to be as confident as we can be that anything we're seeing in the response is due to the active ingredient in the treatment. So having a placebo is a way of controlling for that. It's a way of controlling for other things that could affect the response beyond that active ingredient that's actually in the treatment. And again, we don't want to set up a situation where we bias the experiment in favor of other treatments. Just as an example, imagine there's this drug and you think this is a wonderful drug. It's going to cure something. It's going to have a particular impact on people. You design a study. You have 50 participants. They all get the drug. And you see there's some kind of response. You see they're reacting favorably to it. Do we know for sure it's because of the active ingredient in the drug? If everyone is getting the drug and we're not comparing it to anything else, we can't be sure that they're getting better because of the active ingredient in the drug or because, again, of this power of positive thinking. They think they're getting something that's going to help them. That is possibly decreasing their stress levels. That's giving them a more positive outlook. That's making them feel good. And those things could certainly have an impact on your health, on certain health outcomes. So we want to have a placebo in certain situations. So again, one thing we'd want to do so that we don't reduce this placebo effect is that we'd want to ensure that the subjects don't know for certain what they're getting. They don't know if they're getting a treatment that has the active ingredient versus getting just a sugar pill. So think about, how could you ensure this? How could you ensure that they don't know what's going on? Well, that's where this idea of blinding comes into play. So you're reading in chapters 5 and 6 about studies that are double blind, studies that could be single blind, studies that might not be blind at all. So one thing that you would want to try to control for in the study is you don't want a situation where the researcher is going to behave in a certain way, is going to maybe treat people in one group differently from people in another group. I'm trying to think of a good example here to try to explain this. So it's quite possible that you have a situation where you're comparing a drug to a placebo. And if the researcher knows who's getting the actual drug and who's getting the placebo, it's possible they might interact with those people who are getting the drug in a different way, interact with those who are getting the placebo in a different way. And they might, not necessarily on purpose, but they might influence the results of the study based on how they're behaving toward the individuals in the study. If they're being nicer to certain people, if they're doing things that might lead those people to think, oh, I must be in the group that's getting the treatment because they're treating me in a particular way. They're saying certain things to me. So we want to set up a situation where that ideally will not happen, that the researcher's not going to bias things in a particular direction. If the subjects know what group they're in, that could end up, again, biasing the results. So if you can do this, and you can't necessarily do this in all types of experiments, but you might want to set up what's called a double-blind study. This is an experiment where neither the researcher nor the subjects know what treatment is being applied. So hopefully that will end up lessening the possibility that there will be bias in the study. Now, obviously, in certain situations, the researcher will need to know. The researcher is going to know who's in which treatment, but the subjects might not know who's in which treatment. We'd call that a single-blind study. So the subjects are blind to who's in what treatment, but the researcher knows. In other cases, you might have a situation where the researcher knows who's getting what treatment. The subjects clearly know who's getting what treatment because they can see what kind of treatment they're getting. So you see this in studies that are not drug studies. Oftentimes in drug studies, you would want to try to have a double-blind situation. And again, your textbook gives some other examples of double-blind studies for you to learn a little bit more about it if this is not quite making sense. Okay, so I thought we could get everything in one last video, but I thought this would be the last video, but I'm afraid that I'm going to have to pause here and we're going to come back, but we will wrap things up pretty quickly. There are just a couple more things that I want to make sure we talk about. So hang in there. I know it's been a while, but we're almost done.